I am certain that the Fable reboot is going to look great, and I'm pretty sure that the gameplay will end up feeling fun enough too. But I'm not yet convinced that Playground Games have effectively captured the unique style and tone of those original Fable games. I remain ever hopeful, but I have some pretty major and specific concerns. When the game releases next year, it will, incredibly, have been 15 years since the last mainline Fable release with Fable 3, and I've certainly missed the franchise in all that time. I want nothing more than to see the next evolution of the Fable formula done well. That said, it's pretty clear that this is not so much Fable 4 as it is a completely fresh start for the series. Though I'm well aware that many Fable fans weren't happy with the way the franchise evolved after Fable 2, I have personally enjoyed basically every release. I thought Fable 3 was an absurdly fun and extremely ambitious game, and was in many ways unlike anything I'd played before. And my opinion of the game was definitely helped by specifically avoiding listening to Peter Molyneux's promises in the lead up to release. I played the weird Connect Fable game too, and for all its massive faults, I still found the concept fun and thought it was one of the better Connect offerings. And I even enjoyed playing Fable Legends in the brief time I had access to the beta and before it was cancelled altogether. I thought it was a terrible direction to take the franchise in, but I did still sincerely enjoy it. All that to say that I don't take issue with the series going in a new direction, so long as the Fable spirit remains intact. And while a few trailers can't tell us a lot about how the final game will actually feel to play, they do, when taken together, serve as a mission statement for the overall tone of this reboot. Given that I'm not nearly as concerned about how the game will play as I am about that tone, there's more than enough in these trailers for us to ask ourselves whether this Fable reboot is really going to feel like Fable.
Okay. Let's do it.
I don't by any means consider myself a Fable expert. I might have read the weird Fable 3 tie-in book, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what colour Jack of Blades' eyes are, or how many necklaces Teresa wears in Fable 2. I have always loved these games though, and I had always held out hope after Lionhead's closure that we would see another entry someday. I never expected we'd get a new Fable from a studio known for racing games, but Playground Games know how to make a good product at least, and they are based in the UK too. So they check enough boxes to feel like a good home for the franchise. While I hope at least a few former Lionhead staff are working on this reboot though, the Fable specific engine and the nuanced systems which made it all work are well and truly in the past. And it's hard to tell how much of the franchise's soul is tied to that engine, that studio, and to its leadership. Whatever you think of the controversial Peter Molyneux and his obvious compulsion for telling fibs, there's no denying that he helmed some great games, and the evolution is clear from one to the next. As fantastic as I think the Forza Horizon games are, it's clear that they're a world away from what the Fable experience is. It's no secret that developers working to their strengths and constantly improving in a singular niche leads to good games. And that's why Playground have perfected the open world racing game. But obviously they're unproven in this genre and basically have to start from scratch while attempting to pick up where Fable 3 left off, without any of the institutional knowledge built up over the years at Lionhead. And that means working out what makes a Fable game for a start. I think if you wanted to be extremely reductive about what gives Fable its character, you could nail it down to a few bullet points which, on some surface level, the reboot does seem to be getting right. There's the central concept of heroism, of course, and letting the player choose what kind of hero or villain they want to be. There's the lovable British actors, the dark comedy and slapstick, the whimsical music, the late medieval setting, the surly English villagers, and, of course, kicking chickens. You can almost guarantee that when starting pre-production on this game, the developers would have put together a list that started off something like this to allow them to build the game out around these fundamentals. And like I said, there is evidence of most of this stuff in the trailers. We have Richard Ayoade and Matt King for a start, and they're both great British actors for sure. I don't know if this reboot can ever match the insanely great cast of Fable 3, but either way, these experienced and very funny actors will definitely help the game. The music sounds fantastic too, and very similar to Russell Shaw's amazing work on the series. There's the guild seal in a few spots, and there's plenty of talk of heroes, and it seems like it's sort of funny in several places too, though I'll get back to the comedy here later. The whole world really does look like a faithful next-gen Albion, and we even see chicken kicking, or at least it's very much inferred. If Playground Games fully intend to have chicken kicking in this game, then they should get ahead of any trouble now by clarifying that the chickens in Fable are genetically predisposed to require regular kicking, and are not harmed in any way by the practice. Otherwise, it won't be long before PETA activists turn up at their office to throw fake blood through the windows. Anyway, I feel I should also say that on top of a complex morality system, we will almost certainly get a character creator here too, with male and female options. I will admit that there is a slim chance that there won't be a choice, and that the female hero we see in these trailers is the only hero we get to be. But honestly, that would be such an obviously dumb choice for this reboot that I refuse to even entertain the possibility. If this game somehow doesn't release with a character creator, then I will eat several hats. I don't honestly know why they won't just come out and say either way now though, because it would save them so much heartache if they just committed. I really think this is just a stand-in hero for the purposes of marketing though, because making your own hero is such an important checkbox in the Fable criteria. And of course, the other checkbox that they seem to be ticking here is the one for returning characters. Everyone is pretty sure that this character at the end of the third trailer is going to be Jack of Blades, but it is, weirdly enough, paired with a female voiceover, which in the trailer's captions is said to be coming from a rival hero, apparently. So it might be a red herring. Probably not though, because it makes so much sense that they would want to bring back known characters. This could end very badly, of course, because it's almost impossible that their depiction of Jack of Blades will live up to the original Fables. But all they really have to do to avoid upsetting fans is not completely tear down or reinvent the character. Either keep returning characters faithful or don't bother using them in the first place. I'm definitely expecting at least a few returning characters in this game though, for better or worse. Suffice it to say then that if making a Fable game work was as simple as ticking things off this big Fable checklist, then they're clearly onto a winner here. But obviously, things aren't quite as simple as that. I really want to put all my faith in Playground Games here, and I hope that they deliver something incredible. But as much as it seems to fulfill the criteria, something just doesn't feel quite right to me. Each trailer works on paper but fails to conjure up the right vibe. And I think I can split the reasons why into two big things: the fairy tale influences and stylistic confusion.
This is awkward.
The first trailer they released probably did the best job of nailing the Fable tone, in my opinion. It calls back to the wonderful opening cinematic for Fable 3, which followed a chicken's brief escape attempt, and ends on a similarly dark note to the fairy being swallowed by the toad here. Equally though, if not for prior leaks and the guild seal on the sword, this trailer wouldn't have immediately yelled Fable to me, because I definitely don't associate fairies like this with Fable. There's a part of me which felt that it actually echoed Shrek more than it did Fable. The second trailer then doubled down with its riff on Jack and the Beanstalk featuring Richard Ayoade, and at that point it became pretty clear that they're making classic fairy tales a part of their whole pitch for this new Fable. And I think that this could be a really big mistake. Obviously, Fable has always had its mythical creatures and fantasy aesthetic, but it always felt to me like the franchise went to great lengths to distinguish itself from conventional fantasy tropes, including public domain fairy tales. And that probably became more true the more the series progressed into the Industrial Age. Fable has Balverines and Hobbs. It doesn't have werewolves and hobgoblins, and it always picks and chooses very carefully which fantasy elements it pulls from. Yes, there are allusions to fairy tales and there is plenty of crossover, but there's far more which feels completely unique to this world. Such that inviting a well-known bedtime story like Jack and the Beanstalk risks cheapening the world building and detracting from the things that make Fable its own thing. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but the sequence with Giant Ayoade doesn't look very Fable to me. I get that they're trying to put their own spin on the classic tale here, but it's such a direct reference that it feels painfully unoriginal. I don't know how many times I've seen this story before, but it's definitely enough for one lifetime. So they have to offer an extremely fresh take here to make it worthwhile. Maybe the bigger issue than that though are the implications of having a giant this giant in the game. Richard Ayoade is really big here, and so him even just existing messes with the scale of the world in so many ways we can't even imagine, and has so many implications for the lore. It makes every large enemy less impressive for a start, and it leaves this giant with ultimate power over the world. He could literally trample on everything and destroy Bowerstone in seconds. I really hope then that what's actually happening here is that the hero has been shrunken down, like in the excellent Fable 3 quest, The Game. But it definitely doesn't look that way here. Generally, the fairy tale stuff just feels tonally mismatched to the established Fable universe. Within the fantasy genre, Fable has definitely always leaned towards a more crude, adult-oriented approach. But the fairy tale stuff and the way it's presented here feels like it's aimed at a younger audience, or at least is taking a much safer approach. And it's at odds even with some of the gameplay shown in these trailers, where random passers-by swear uninvited at the hero, for example. The third trailer also tries to offer a more serious tone at points, and that leans more towards the dark side of the series, which I think is important. The three mainline Fable games all start with tragedy after all, and have some very purely grim scenes as well as some darkly funny moments. But all of these elements and themes just feel a bit jumbled together in these trailers. The balance never feels quite right for Fable. The fairy tale twists they're layering in here are obviously key to this reboot. And if that allows Playground Games to try some new things within the general framework of expectations for a Fable game, then I guess that's okay and could be interesting. My worry is that already it's changing the DNA of the franchise too much.
And the occasional giant toad, for some reason.
The second and third trailers for Fable, which were apparently rendered in-engine, and in some shots feature raw gameplay without a HUD, reveal that this reboot will feature a much more realistic art style than the original games. Obviously, as older generation releases, the Fable games would have struggled to go for true realism. But regardless, characters and environments definitely had an exaggerated, stylized look. This change is a little bit jarring then, and it definitely feels like it could take away some of Fable's charm by making it look like every other fantasy game. Overall though, everything does look beautiful at least, so I don't think this is necessarily a bad choice for the reboot. In terms of style and presentation though, my biggest concern with the second and third trailer is this weird anachronistic mockumentary style they've used. First of all, it has to be noted that both of these trailers are presented with a matching character title card. So these are presumably intended to be part of a series of interview-style videos released in the lead up to launch. How many we can expect, I don't know, but it is strange that they released these first two a year apart from one another. That aside though, I really don't like this mockumentary style here for a few reasons. I'll preface those reasons by saying that I'm pretty sure, or at least I desperately hope, that this is just for the purposes of marketing. But at the same time, it's all done in-engine and in-house, so it's not like this is an outsourced promotional campaign which has no bearing on the game itself. We've seen that sort of thing before, of course, where game characters give interviews in a studio environment, and sometimes it's mildly amusing. Either way though, this mockumentary style feels like a strong statement of intent for the game, and I don't really understand it. These apparent interviews are clearly set in universe, and so you have to ask sincerely, who are they talking to? What exactly is the concept they're trying to put across here? Because I can't not consciously register that this is a documentary setup, and that is naturally at odds with the setting. Are there cameras here, or is there some sort of magic-based live stream setup? If this wasn't Fable and just a new medieval TV comedy, I think it would kind of work. I would definitely watch a mockumentary sitcom with Super Hans and Maurice Moss in medieval England, but I'm struggling to make this work in my head specifically for Fable. And look, the obvious argument against what I'm saying here is that it's funny and that's all that matters, because Fable is known for funny. But putting aside that it's not the kind of comedy I'd expect or want from Fable, I'm not convinced it's that funny to begin with anyway. Because this framing device isn't really set up properly, nor is it utilised for any particularly good jokes. Fable's funny stuff was almost always rooted in its world and not in self-referential, fourth wall breaking jokes. It was, more often than not, player created too, with enough systems to support amusing shenanigans. And elsewhere, it was situational character comedy and slapstick. And while we do see some hints at that sort of thing in the trailers, it concerns me that that is not where they're placing the emphasis. Ultimately, I don't think the comedy works when the format is forcing the audience to ask questions and pulling them out of the world rather than immersing them in it. Maybe it's just me. It is possible. But I think the style just felt mismatched. If the mockumentary stuff is just a format they're using to lay the groundwork and introduce a few new characters for this reboot, then that's fine, I guess. But ultimately, the statement they're making by showing off the game like this is that the rules of the world are unclear and the tone is confused.
Whoa! Yep, that's the ticket. Yeah, nice. Yeah, nice.
It should be perfectly fine for this reboot to take a new direction with the franchise. And arguably, it's a necessity to evolve Fable in Playground Games' own way and create something which deserves to exist as part of the series. But the fairy tale aspects do concern me, and the confused style does too. At a point, if they take the franchise in enough of a different direction, you have to wonder why they would start with Fable at all, rather than just create a new franchise, other than for the obvious reasons. It's definitely not uncommon these days for companies to dig up old brands or IP for the sake of what little name recognition they still have in order to convince consumers to buy their new thing, even if it has very little to do with the original. An insincere adaptation rarely works though, and usually upsets more people than it wins over. I really don't think that's the case with this Fable reboot, but there are definitely reasons to worry. As much as I've tried to remain optimistic about the game, every new trailer has left me a little bit more concerned about the direction they're taking, even if there are some positive signs. For now, I'm choosing to believe that the key creatives on Fable wanted to try some new things, but do actually care about doing the franchise justice and getting the tone right. And so long as that is the case, any missteps in storytelling or style should hopefully blend with the classic Fable experience. Hopefully. How are you feeling about this Fable reboot though? What do you think of the fairy tale stuff, and do you have any other big concerns? Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk about more video game stuff. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.